Hello, this is the story of the Banshee and the fairy queen Maeve. Maeve had been queen of the fairies for a very, very long time, and most of the time she enjoyed her job. Fairies could be interesting, they could be funny, and they could be kind. But they could also be spiteful, quarrelsome, and troublesome, and very petty. And on days when fairies were like this, she began to wonder why she kept being their queen. To help her calm down, she had a little thing that she liked to do. She would take her harp and she would leave the fairy fort, cross out of its field into the field next door, where there was a stand of trees. She would fly up into the topmost branch of the tallest tree, and there she would play her harp, making beautiful music to soothe her soul and calm herself. Now, after one morning when the fairies had been particularly quarrelsome, she decided to spend the afternoon up the tree with her harp. She left the fort and made her way to her favourite resting place and began to play. Now, I have to tell you that the music that the fairy queen made was quite simply the most beautiful sound that was ever heard on the entire face of the planet. It was so beautiful that birds in mid-flight would stop and alight onto the branches in order to listen to it, and all the little scurrying animals that lived in the meadow would gather around the tree and sit and listen to the beautiful sounds the queen made. The little insects would stop their crawling around, and even the bees stopped looking for honey in order to listen to the sweet sound that the queen could make from her harp. Now, this particular day she was playing so beautifully and so sweetly that she was completely oblivious of all that was going on around her, which is why she didn't see the black shape from the east approaching. She didn't see its red eyes. She didn't see its talon-like claws until it was too late and she had been snatched up and was being carried away. For the creature was a banshee. The banshee, a wicked fairy spirit who knows when people are about to die and spends her entire life trying to warn them, but no one listens to her cries, and so she has become angry and bitter and twisted inside. The banshee flew across the rest of the breadth of Ireland until she arrived at the cliffs on its westernmost shore, cliffs that rose up from where the mighty Atlantic pounded its waves against the foot. Halfway up there was a cave, and in the gloomy darkness of the cave the banshee lived. She took the queen and she sat her down on a pile of nasty leftover fish bones, remains of the banshee's supper, and she said in a very unpleasant and unkind voice, "Fairy Queen Maeve, I have brought you here to my cave. Here in the gloom and the darkness your fairy magic does not work. Only my banshee magic works here, and I want you to play your music for me and for no others. Begin to play." And Maeve couldn't help herself. Her fingers began to twitch and to pluck at the strings of her harp, and a merry jig began to fill the cave. The banshee sat in the corner, crooning a horrible sound along to the music. Now, back in the fairy fort, at first the fairies didn't miss the queen at all. They were quite used to her taking herself off up into a tree and playing her harp, so it was only when it started to get dark that they began to worry. They set off around the fields near the fairy fort to see if they could find her, but by the time darkness fell there was no sign anywhere. In the morning, when she still hadn't returned, they gathered together to try and work out a plan of action. "We should ask Sean and Porrig, the leprechauns who live in the field next door, if they will help us," said one of the fairies. "I know we don't like them. I know we don't trust leprechauns because they can be tricky, but at least they know everybody." It was agreed that the leprechauns would be approached, and finally they agreed to help, for they too liked to listen to the music that the fairy queen would make. The leprechaun brothers scoured far and near, asking every creature that they came across if they had seen any sign of the fairy queen, but none had, until at last they came across a hedgehog, who said, "Well, I haven't seen her myself. In fact, I haven't seen her for quite some time, but in that tree over there is a hawk, and he does not miss anything. I'm sure that if the Fairy Queen was here, he will have seen her and he will know what has happened to her. So the leprechauns hurried over to the tree and they called to the hawk, who landed with a gentle thud on the grass in front of them. When he heard what had happened and who they were looking for, he said, "Oh yes, I saw the Fairy Queen Maeve. She was in her tree yesterday playing beautiful music. But the Banshee came and has swooped and taken her away. I thought you knew. In fact, I thought that you would probably be out looking for her. Otherwise, I would have come and told you sooner." Now, this was a problem for the leprechauns, for they all knew where the Banshee lived, but they also knew that was a good day and a half's travel. "It'll be too late by the time we get there," said Porrig despondently. "Oh, perhaps I can help you," said the hawk. "Maybe I should have said something sooner. One of you climb onto my back and I will hold the other in my claws. I will fly you to the cliffs." And so the hawk flapped his huge wings and took off into the sky, and in no time at all the two leprechauns could see the sea up ahead. But as they drew closer, a large black red-eyed bird rose up from the cliff. It squealed and screamed a horrible screeching sound, and it had sharp talon-like claws. It came after the hawk as an eagle would take a sheep. And the poor hawk had no choice but to swerve around and change direction. When the big black bird was sure that the hawk was going away again, it flew back down the cliff and disappeared. But the hawk had no intention of going home. He stopped and lowered himself into a field. "You can get off here," he said to the leprechauns. "You'll have to walk the rest of the way, but I'll wait, and when you've rescued the Fairy Queen, call me and I'll fly you back to the fairy fort." The two brothers made their way across the field until they reached the edge of the cliff. They peered over, and far below they could see the waves pounding on the beach, and they could hear the roar of them as they crashed against the seas, the walls of the cliffs. A long way down there was a gap, and this they knew must be the entrance to the Banshee's cave, but it was far too far below them for them to be able to reach, and they didn't dare climb down, for it was almost a sheer drop, and they would certainly die if they fell. Despondently, they sat down on a rock to try and devise a new plan, and as they did, they noticed a couple of rabbits scampering towards them. The rabbits disappeared down a tiny crack in the rock. "Porrig," said Sean, "do you see what I see?" "Yes," said his brother, "I see a crack in the rock, a crack that could be hammered into a bigger crack, and that might make a new passage into the cave below." "And who would be better at hammering than a leprechaun?" said his brother. "Only leprechauns have the power to beat their way through that rock. Quick!" The two brothers broke off a branch from a nearby gorse bush, and they fashioned themselves a couple of shillelaghs, and then, being careful to keep time with the pounding of the waves below, they began to beat the rock and the earth around it. In no time at all they had opened up a passage that led all the way down through the cliffs into the cave of the Banshee, and when they put their head down they could hear music rising up. "That must be the place," said Sean. "Quick!" And without even thinking, he lowered himself down, followed by his brother. The two leprechauns landed with a thud in the Banshee's cave. The floor was littered with bones and the remains of fish, but there in the corner they could just make out in the gloom the Fairy Queen Maeve, her fingers bleeding, plucking away at the strings of her harp, and by the entrance stood the red-eyed, angry Banshee. She took a step closer to the leprechauns and she said, "I hate leprechauns. What are you doing here? I hope you don't think you can rescue the Fairy Queen, for only Banshee magic works here, and I wish her to play for me and no other. But now you are here, it would be a shame to waste you, and I'm sure that I will be able to eat both of you for tea today." And she began to edge closer still. As she got closer, the Fairy Queen began to play a different tune. No longer a jolly dance tune. This tune was slower, gentler. It woke, it woke in the back of the minds of the two leprechaun brothers memories of their childhood, the time when they had lived with their mother, the time where in the evenings she had snuggled them down into their beds and sung them a song to this very tune. Without realizing they were doing it, the two brothers began to sway in time to the music. And then they both of them began to sing. They began to sing an old song, an ancient song, a leprechaun lullaby sung by leprechaun mothers for centuries before. They began to sing, "Fly away, Banshee, be gone, Banshee. Your wickedness can't hurt me and mine. Go away, Banshee, far across the sea, and stay there till the end of time. Go away, Banshee, be gone, Banshee. Your wickedness can't hurt me and mine. Go away, Banshee, far across the sea. Go away for a very long time." And as the leprechaun brothers began to sing, the Banshee let out a loud squealing wail. "What is this horrible sound? Stop! Stop!" But the brothers didn't stop. They carried on singing, and the magic from the ancient leprechaun lullaby, for indeed it was an old leprechaun spell, took hold of the Banshee, and she was sucked out of the entrance of the cave and flung far, far across the sea. Once she was gone, her magic spell was broken, and the fairy queen put down her harp with relief. Now her magic too could work, and she magicked the leprechauns and herself up onto the top of the cliff, where the hawk carried all three of them back to the fairy fort. The fairies were overjoyed to have their queen back, and they laid on an enormous party to which they invited the hawk and the hedgehog and both of the leprechaun brothers. They apologised to the queen for being so quarrelsome and for causing the trouble, but they played the music on the night of the party so that the queen's fingers could finally get better. But who would have thought that an ancient leprechaun lullaby could save the fairy queen from the wicked Banshee? But it did.